and succeed.
Moving away from oil is a huge national security issue. Tom Friedman from the New York Times has a great phrase. He talks about the first law of petropolitics, which is that the price of oil and the path of freedom run in opposite directions. 8 of the 9 largest oil exporters in the world are dictatorships or autocratic kingdoms. Oil has a huge amount of economic rent attached to it. When it comes into a wealthy a kingdom or a autocracy or dictatorship, it tends to enhance the power of the central authority. I think one of the major tasks is to destroy oil as a strategic commodity, because oil is what funds all of this. And I don't mean destroy oil, period. I mean destroy its strategic role, sort of the way electricity and refrigeration destroyed salt's strategic role at the end of the 19th century. Until the very end of the 19th century, salt was a strategic commodity because it was the only way to preserve meat, and countries actually fought wars over salt mines. The biblical phrase, "You're the salt of the earth," means you're important, not that you're cheap. It basically is now kind of boring, and that's what we need to do to oil, make it boring like salt. Very difficult to do that if you just rely on alternative liquid fuels. Some of the biomass fuels being reasonably costly, a number of tens of dollars per barrel of oil equivalent. Probably after a few years they'll get down to around where oil is today, $40 a barrel, but it's always going to be kind of close. The thing that's new is battery improvements, which make it possible to use electricity to charge batteries in power vehicles. 15 years ago, batteries were boring. They'd effectively not changed for well over 100 years. Lead-acid battery was a lead-acid battery. But about 15 years ago, because of the consumer electronics revolution getting well underway, you started to have very bright young graduates of Caltech and MIT and Stanford starting battery companies, and it's moving to alternate materials away from lead acid, although there are some creative ways people are looking at now to be able to change the nature of lead acid batteries, make them with foam and so forth. But first to nickel metal hydride and then to lithium ion, and also change some of the materials within the battery in the cathode in the lithium ion batteries. All of these things are developing and moving fast. And electricity today, for example, in the States is even with the low cost of oil, is about a fifth or a quarter the cost of gasoline per mile if you use it the right way in a plug-in hybrid, for example. Germany and Japan are part of the 2 leading countries in deployment of solar collectors. Before long, they'll be able to put those together with decent batteries and use that stored solar energy to charge their cars at night and run the next day on sunlight. I do that some myself because I have a hybrid that's been converted to a plug-in. I have an extra big battery in it, and I charge it from the photovoltaic cells and the batteries in my house and drive on sunlight. It's a little expensive right now, but it keeps getting cheaper every year. So I've been involved in the environmental or the security, a bit longer aspects of energy for 30, 35 years. And I organized some think tank groups centered around moving away from vulnerable systems of energy, and somewhere along the way here in the late 80s, early 90s, I got interested in global warming issues. But our problem has been that we have waited for single solutions, and the government has chosen single solutions and tried to do the job all by one solution. It has failed miserably. We tried the Synthetic Fuels Corporation in the early 80s, and that went bankrupt in 86 when the Saudis dropped the bottom out of the oil market. People got very enthusiastic about hydrogen, even though it takes a very huge infrastructure, newly built, which would be, in this country, hundreds of billions of dollars, or one former Secretary of Energy told me he thought it'd be over $1 trillion of infrastructure. I tend to think you want to focus on using existing infrastructures, which is one reason to use electricity to charge some of these newer batteries and put the batteries in the cars. And you can use the infrastructure of gasoline and diesel distribution for various types of biofuels, either alcohol-based, which can mix with gasoline, different types of ethanol, methanol, butanol, etc., or various types of diesel fuel made from waste products or algae or biodiesel of different types. There's some disadvantages to some of these biofuels, but it's really a very bad idea to stay away from biofuels in toto. You need to work on those as well as the electricity for the cars. If you look at Denmark, for example, a third of Denmark's electricity comes from something called combined heat and power, or cogeneration. It's very simple. You just take the waste heat from a factory, boil water with it, create steam, drive a generator, string a wire across the road to, say, an aluminum plant, and sell the aluminum plant that needs electricity, the electricity that you're producing. So there's a way to produce about a third of your electricity just from the way you use waste heat. If you put together energy efficiency and using combined heat and power or cogeneration, you won't see those curves turn up. They'll start to turn down, and that makes it even easier to replace things like coal-fired power plants with photovoltaic cells on your roof. Winston Churchill once said that the Americans always do the right thing, but unfortunately only after they've exhausted all other possibilities. We've been exhausting other possibilities than sensible ones in terms of dealing with our oil dependence for some time, but I think we're on the right track in part because the people who are concerned about climate change and wanting to move away from gasoline and diesel, and the people who are concerned about national security and wanting to move away from anything derived from oil, have effectively gotten together and started working on a lot of the same things. And that's changing the politics of this issue in the United States a lot.